Hello, hi. I hope the audio quality is okay. Um, we're gonna start in a few minutes. Just waiting for some people, see if they actually, well, if they actually will be joining. Uh, and of course, well, we'll be talking about the lesson four, right? The lesson four. Uh, just a couple more minutes. Hello. Does this sound okay? Okay. Uh, I think the audio quality is fine. Excuse me for the background noise, right? But uh, of course, then let's start with the conference, right? Um, uh, this week we talk about mostly data, right? We saw how to handle data, how to store data, and well, most importantly, that there are many different ways uh, of handling data, and well, we have to choose the actual, well, the way that works for the what we're trying to do, right? Um, so for this kind of uh, job, we're going to be needing several things, right? We saw preferences, we saw a database and how to access that with a content provider, and we saw files, how to read files, the JSON file that we read on the example, and well, apart from that, we can read and write data. Uh, I'll be talking a little bit about the importance of the things that we choose, right? But anyways, these are the topics that I want to cover today. And there'll be uh, assets and resources because there are actually two different things, right? Um, the ways of storing data, and then a little example of how to actually use the preference cost. I'll leave the example application in the description later. And then how to work the exercise, right? So let's begin with the presentation. Assets and resources. Uh, There are actually two different things in the an Android project when we want to talk about the stuff that we actually care about in the project, right? We know about resources, and resources are, of course, as we have already worked with them, strings, colors, icons, and stuff like that, right? And then assets, you can think of them as external files, files that actually have to, we want to include in our application, but are not actually related to the application. You can think of this like the example JSON, it's a list of data and stuff like that. We can include images or videos, music, whatever that will go in the assets. So when to use assets and when to use resources, right? Um, well, as I said, resources are the data we'll be working on in our application. We can directly reference this kind of stuff, uh, like the strings. We can access them like r.string and whatnot. Uh, and the same ways for icons, for colors, uh, values, like the margins, the dimensions, layouts, and all that kind of stuff is a resource because it works for application. Mostly the resources for an application, you can think of them as simple data. And then there are the assets. The assets folder and, well, general assets, they contains data, or not only data, but sometimes they contain logos or sample music, background images, and other things that we'll want to include in our application, but aren't really related or like aren't part of the application, right? Like a logo, music tune, or a, a JSON file, an XML file that contains some data. Mostly these are kind of larger files than, than the resources, but they still have to be quite small in data, right? You have to be careful about this because there are also limits in what kind of data we can actually include with the application. You might need to download the extra data if it comes to files that are too big. You might want to consider downloading the data instead of including it with the application. And that's kind of the most important difference, right? Resources are simple, strings, numbers, colors, uh, and we can directly use them with our application. While assets, you include in the assets stuff like JSONs or text files, maybe images, stuff that may be useful, but are like aesthetics or data, like databases that we want to include, but we don't want to have them as part of the application. They are included as a raw data. I, and that's why that's like how you should decide if something might go in a resource or an asset. Okay, then let's talk about the data storage, right? We saw three main ways of storing data in, well, in our applications, right? We saw the SQLite and how we access an SQLite database using a content provider. In the activity, we also saw how to access the database by creating a DAO, a data access object. Um, I'll talk a bit about those, but then we saw files, right? How we access them in the assets, and we can also write files, like, and that, well, mostly when you want to write a file, it's important data, right? Or you'll see games also write a lot of files, but they write into the cache. And that will be another point of the presentation, but when it comes to that, right? Then we saw shared preferences that store key value pairs, and we can store simple data, and that we can't store objects like custom objects or whatnot. We only can store strings, integers, simple data. So let's start with the SQLite, right? For those of you that haven't actually worked with an SQLite database or an SQL database, SQLite is like the lightweight version, right? Hence the name. It's a relational database, meaning the queries, how you access the data, well, not the queries themselves, but the tables that store the data can be related to one another. Like if you keep a table with the IDs of the students, you can use that ID to relate to a specific student, right? Maybe you have the table of students enrolled in a course, and then you can get the data in the students using that ID. There's really a whole lot to relational databases, and I invite you guys to actually read a bit about them. SQLite is included in every application, and you can use it as a default way of storing data. Of course, you are not forced to, but it's well, it's a good way to do it. Then SQLite is a lightweight version of SQL, and it's included in Android application because of that. It's lightweight and it's very simple to work with. If you have any experience using SQL, you should feel right at home with SQLite. Then, as I said, every application actually starts with an SQLite database. Not really a database, but it's a, well, you can create your own tables and a database, and each application has their own. It's in their own space, and uh, it's something that normally other applications can't access, right? But even despite that, um, there's a problem that they are not very safe. SQL has a function to encrypt data and provide the keys to access data and everything like that. But SQL is one of the features that they didn't include. So it's not good to actually um, store sensitive data in the database because it's stored as plain text. So when you're using an SQLite database, be sure to actually store only the important data that your app needs, right? Like, for example, if a user logs in with their email or their password, you're not going to store that because it's really, really unsafe. Or if you get the address or something, you also don't want to store that in an SQLite database. database. You might want to actually use another provider or something that encrypts the data, because it's not safe. And if you want to store that kind of data, you have to be absolutely sure that you can store the data. You have to encrypt the data and save it in a safe way, right? Like, since it's actually in plain text, anyone who knows how to access data, right? You can, someone can install an Android app and go to the files, right, of the other applications, because if you have permission to actually write the storage, then you can also do that. You can go through the whole directory tree and read for stuff that you can read for that kind of data, and you can actually find it. And well, of course, people have bad intentions and everything, but it shouldn't be on you that that kind of data gets leaked. This is an example of how SQLite works, right? You have like a little table like this one, where you are storing a student ID, their name, and the grade they're coursing. You can actually store many more things, but when then you make a query to access this little table, and you tell the, in your query, you select what you want, right? Like here, I just have select name, then that means I will only get the name column. You can actually uh, select every column or only the ones you're interested in. You put that right there, separated by commas. Then the next part of the query is the from clause. With the from, you tell the database which table you want to query. And of course, suppose this table is called students, right? Then you select the name from the table of students, and then the where, you can actually omit this, uh, and it will return every single entry on the table. But if you want, for example, here, you just want the name of the student whose ID is 0001, you put that in the where clause. Um, when working with this kind of databases, you have to be extremely careful with, the select query is really not a problem, right? But there are also two queries that are very, very dangerous, and you should actually work with backups if you're going to be using them frequently, or really you have to test really, really well your applications. Those two queries are update and delete, because as I said, you can skip the where clause, and if you skip the where clause in a delete query, then you're going to delete the whole table. Not only, like, imagine you want to remove the student with the ID 0001, but you forgot the word clause. The query is going to delete absolutely everything on the table. The same for the update query. It's going to update every single row. Of course, for update, you also have to provide the other set of data, but still, be careful when working with SQL databases. Now then, how do you actually access these databases? Accessing them, you can actually throw a raw query. That's how you actually construct the DAO, or how you actually get data with content values that I'll explain a little bit later. But for programming sake, you don't want to actually be writing raw queries every single part of your code, right? Because then you're going to have these really long strings and concatenating and adding values from variables and whatnot. And it's really not a good way to keeping your code readable. Instead, there are two main ways in Android that we can use. Well, Android comes with the content provider option, right? We already saw how the content provider works, that it abstracts the database handling. You open a helper and then you can use queries like you send like a function insert and you send the parameters and they store that in your database. And another cool thing is that a content provider can share data. It can give, make public to the phone, the data from our application, instead of it being stuck in the sandbox that our application is in, right? It can give that data to applications. And then it also can be used with widgets. And of course, that's the main way of interacting with a widget. Then you create a content provider that gives the widget data. The other way to actually access our database, if you're not trying to leave raw queries everywhere on your code, is to uh, use a DAO. That's a design pattern. It does the same thing that a content provider does. It creates methods um, to avoid using the queries, right? And the other thing is it's very simple. It doesn't take long to make one, and it can really help. Uh, well, accessing the data. It's very simple. You don't have to create a DAO at any time, right? Since content provider is already there and it already provides us with the tools to do it, you can use content providers everywhere. But using a DAO, especially in applications that keep their data to themselves, it's a good alternative. Uh, the files in Android, of course, it uses the same classes as Java. So if you know how to write only data in Java, you shouldn't have any problem. Of course, the extra steps of actually getting the directory or getting the cache, getting the file, getting permission. Once you are done with all that, it's the same thing, right? You write, you read the file the exact same way you do with Android. Um, when you want to use files as a means of storing data in an Android application, is like when you want to create logs, backups, or maybe even using the cache. Otherwise, there are many other ways of storing it, right? Files may be a little bit slower depending if they are actually on the external storage or they are stored somewhere else and you have to actually get the permission and read it. And, well, a good thing about being able to create files is that you can create like, you can export your database, maybe your preferences or something like that. Maybe your user is working on a checklist or something and you want to export that so they can actually access them somewhere else. Uh, you can create the logs, error logs and everything like that. If your app crash and you can create log and send it. Um, well, most applications, especially now with the updates to Google Console and other stuff like that, like in Firebase, they send the report errors automatically, so you don't have to do this, but now that you can do this kind of stuff. Reading data is actually more useful, right? Because you can include data or you can let the user pick a file and grab the data from there. Um, Anyways, the cache directory is important for responsiveness, especially if you're using big apps like games, right? You want to make good use of your cache because otherwise you'll be uh, requesting the data, reading, and then printing your data or whatever you want to do with the data. And if you're in it every time from the phone memory, then you're going to have a slow app, and games can't afford that kind of thing. They make uh, a big use of the cache, right? Because they want to actually keep their data like close so they can use it very fast. Uh, Now, I'm going to be giving a little example of a settings page. I don't know if there are actually uh, any questions regarding this or other stuff. Uh, I'm going to leave the code for this. This little project is just a reference screen using the reference class. I'll explain it a little bit, right? But know that I'll leave the code down there in the description once the presentation is done, right? So I'm going to just explain the general idea of how to work with the preference class. So, okay, if there aren't any questions, I'll move on to the preference class. Uh, in the course, we saw the shared preferences, right? And shared preferences store key value pairs and everything like that. But the preference class is something else. It provides an UI. It uses preference items. Uh, you'll see instead of a edit text like you use in a layout, the preference class uses an edit box preference, edit text preference, sorry. Uh, and these are kind of their own thing, but they have similar behavior and everything to the other preference views, I'm sorry. So a preference class uses a shared preference. This is actually the same shared preference that you get when you actually call get shared. It was default shared preferences. You get this file that the preference class also uses. And edit text preference, checkbox preference, list preference. You can even remember how you can create your own custom views. You can do the same thing with preferences. You can add, for example, a time picker inside a dialog preference and create your own time picker preference, or what I'm going to show in the example, I created a number picker preferences that has a min and max value. Like if you want to show more or less items, for example, in a list or in a grid, you can do that. And of course, you can also use shared preference and create your activity and write to the shared preference file when you're modifying the values. Uh, but this way is already implemented, right? So why not use it? It will save you the time of actually reading data and storing data and creating the UI and everything like that. This class already does it, so I think it's better to use what it's already there and it's already tested, right? But you can create the exact same functionality using simple views. Uh, So how to create a preference screen? I'm going to use the compact fragment, of course, for compatibility and whatnot. Uh, it's a good idea to use compatibility libraries, even if you are above the required API. Because the newer libraries, for example, there's the B4 library that includes the Fragment class, right? And you might be thinking, that requires API 11. I'm not going to develop for that, so I can use the regular Fragment, right? Uh, but then you are, suppose your minimum API is going to be KitKat or something like that. KitKat doesn't have the material design elements like the recycler view, right, or the card view, but you can use it using the support V7 library. But the V7 library has a dependency on the V4 library. So when using the V7 library, you, uh, well, it forces you to use the V4 library. So unless you're actually developing for a really new API, you might want to use the support library anyways, because you know the support libraries are they kind of build upon each other. And if you're using one, chances are that it has a dependency on other ones. So anyways, I digress a little. Uh, where was I? Yes. And this example, there's only one activity, and that activity, the only thing that it's going to do is show a fragment. Then you create a preference screen, but you don't actually create a layout for it. You create your file called app preferences in the XML folder, not in the layout folder, because it's not a layout, as we know, right? For an activity is kind of their own thing, and it kind of looks like this. It looks, you'll see, very similar to a normal layout, but the thing is that it doesn't use the MBUs or layouts. You see, the root object is a preference screen. Then there's a preference category that is like a, a child of the preference screen. Uh, the preference category is like, if you have gone to your phone settings, you'll notice that they are divided like in screen settings, memory, and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of the thing. And then you see the text preference, and the, that behaves like an edit text. There's a really important thing here, and that's the key attribute that is used to identify our preferences. It's kind of like the ID of a view, right? Then you create a fragment, a preference fragment that is going to be what displays our preferences, uh, kind of like any other fragment. But take a look, you don't actually inflate the layout or anything. You actually, the main method is the create preferences, and then you just kind of add the preferences like that, add preference from resources, and you give them app preference XML that we created. You see they are very, very similar, but they are the preferences and those things are layouts. Then we can create a custom preferences, right? Like I I created here a number of picker of preference that is going to be shown in a dialog. Um, some the dialog preference, like the edit text preference, it creates a dialog and then you insert whatever. you can extend the behavior of those preferences and create your own. What you need is the constructor, then the get value for the preference, the set value, and then there are two methods: get default value and set initial value. The get default value, you use that to give the preference a value if it doesn't have one. Like maybe if you are making a time preference, you give it like say noon or something. If you're making something like this, you might want to give it 0 or 5 or something. And then the set initial value is the value that it displays when it's called. This is kind of if it has already been modified, you'll display the set value, if not the default value. Okay, then you create a custom dialog. It's a preference dialog, right? It's called the number picker dialog fragment because it extends from the dialog fragment. And from this, the important thing is the number picker. Of course, we are using a number picker, so we need to create one. Then the fragment needs to have instead of being like created, it needs, instead of the onCreate, it needs a new instance method, right? Then on bind dialog and on dialog close. On bind dialog, you do stuff when the dialog is created and it's shown to the user. And on dialog close, you do stuff when the dialog is closed. Of course, saving our data is done on dialog close because when it's closed, you will receive a positive or negative response, right? The positive response, when they click OK or accept or whatever, you get the data and you save it. You do this like getting the value from the picker we defined earlier, and then you get you call a preference, right? Then you check if the actual preference is the preference, the number picker preference that we created, and if it is, we use the set number method we already defined to save that. And then preferences come with a summary attribute that is like a preference has a title and a summary. So to display the value on the summary screen, right? So the user may know that it already has set a value or something. You do that when you create the fragment, right? You put that, you get the reference to the preference that you want to save. You get the value, and then you set a listener so that you know when the value has changed. And when it has changed, you use the set summary method to set the summary and actually change what the user will see. Like, have a look. This is the example I was working on, and you can see from left to right, I have two preferences. One is edit text, then a checkbox, and then there's the number picker, right? You can see there's nothing saved on the username, but then I create, when you select that, it opens a dialog, and then it is shown on the summary text, the username that you already have selected, right? this is kind of how the preference class works. And well, of course, you can use the shared preferences. Like I said before, if you want to use the shared preferences to save data, but this is already done. And finally, to close the presentation, right, the activity for lesson 4, right, using a DAO with a database. A DAO, as you know, is just a design pattern. It just defines methods to access the data and to avoid having the queries everywhere on the application. So how to actually do the exercise? We create a class called content values. Content values store key value pairs again, like think of a shared preference, right? But a content value is more like a bundle. It stores lots of small data, and they are kind of meant to be used with this kind of operations. When you insert the data to a content value, you actually want to insert the key is going to be the name of the column you want to insert, and then the value is, well, the value of the attribute, right? Like if it's remember the table I worked with in the little example, if you were to create a content value, you you will give the key will be like a student and then like John or something like that. Then after you create them, you just use values dot put, and you give the data from wherever you're collecting them, and then you use the database. This is a database helper. They insert in the table. The null is like a bit complicated. Don't worry about that. It's kind of like to know if there are empty values on the content values. But if you're inserting everything right, just pass null and then the content values. The next part, reading from the database, you use a cursor. And a cursor is like you give a query to a cursor object, and then it gives you a pointer to the result of that query. And then you can move the cursor from like the first row, the second row, the third row, and like that to get to read the result from your query. You give it the query, you can see, move to first, you call it to actually set the pointer of the cursor, and then you read the data and move the cursor until you're done or you find what you're looking for. And the final part of the exercise is the easy. Once that is done, you just call the methods from your displays, and that's it. So if there aren't any questions, this is going to be everything for this lesson. As always, I hope that you guys enjoyed it or learned something. If you didn't like it, let us know in the comments or in the forums. We check there more often than here, so that will be a better idea. Okay, then. I guess this will be everything for the course. So you guys take care. We're almost closing on the course, and if you guys want to get the certificate, I think it closes the 15th. of this month, just to kind of have a little time for that. And I'll see you guys on the next presentation. Thank you and take care.